very good evening and welcome to this evening's episode of The Watchdog. Now, as many of you would know by now, former President Jacob Zuma will only know on Friday what the Pietermaritzburg High Court Judge Bekisi Samguni thinks of the case presented today by his lawyer Dalim Bofu, whether in fact it has merit or should be dismissed with costs, as Advocate Tembeka Ngugaitobi argued on behalf of the state capture inquiry. But what the former president got to know today, though, was that the ANC leadership loves him very much and wants his court application to succeed. ANC Deputy Secretary General Jessie Duarte addressed a media briefing today where she detailed the outcomes of a full-day ANC-NEC meeting that was almost entirely dedicated to Jacob Zuma and the drama that unfolded outside his Nkandla home at the weekend, where his supporters descended to show their support for their hero. So tonight on the show, we examine in detail the decisions of the ANC leadership, whether they are telling us anything or giving us any insights into the collective mind of the ANC leadership, the party that runs the country. The Watchdog starts now.
We are concerned. We are really concerned.
The governing party weighing in on the recent developments at Nkandla. The African National Congress is the political home of former President Jacob Zuma. Over the weekend, the ANC had to move its NEC meeting to deal with the developments around its former president, who was sentenced by the Constitutional Court. The party says that it's concerned about what happened in Nkandla over the weekend. It wants those who organize the gathering to account.
We instruct the SGO and provincial secretaries to urgently investigate and initiate disciplinary action against the organizers responsible for the incitement of violence and defiance of COVID regulations, and individuals responsible for burning the ANC regalia and other acts of ill discipline which violates the ANC's constitution and code of conduct. The NEC calls on all its structures, leaders and members to ensure that we remain focused on the key tasks confronting the nation today, in particular, the fight against COVID-19.
And more trouble looming against the party's suspended Secretary General Ace Magashule. During the event, Magashule did not miss the opportunity to speak his mind.
When they disband you as a branch, you must still be a branch. When they expel you, you must still be a member of the ANC. You must not go anywhere. When they disband a branch, a region, you must still remain a branch and a region. Because you were elected.
This could see the suspended ANC Secretary General facing more charges.
We will be asking him to explain himself, basically. There were two versions. One version was a newspaper version, which was clearly incorrect. The second version was what we ourselves heard, is the Secretary General calling on those structures who are going to be disbanded for any reason to disobey. I'm not using the exact word that he used, but to disobey the leadership.
The party also announced that it has appointed senior NEC members to have ongoing talks with the former president.
We have selected a group of NEC members who are going to work with the PEC and the current NEC deployees, very senior members of the ANC, who will on an ongoing basis be having talks with Comrade Zuma. And this is very important. Comrade Zuma is an elder of our organization. We love him, we respect him, and there's no reason for us not to continue to engage with him.
Nkandla Khatlani, SABC News, Johannesburg.
So, what can we read from the ANC statement that was released today, read out by its Deputy Secretary General, Jesse Duarte. Any particular insights, more of the same, or has the ground shifted? Well, to help us decode a lot of the things that were said today, I am joined this evening by Asanda Ngwasheng, Ongama Mdimka, and Ralph Mateja. Good evening to all three of you, and thank you so much for coming through.
Good evening, Vuyo.
Good evening. Thank you for having us.
I'm going to start with you, Asanda, just from the little that Nhlanhla took us through there. Your takeaways?
I think that the ANC, as you heard, started off saying all the right things. And then you heard that when Jessie Duarte had to sort of speak off the cuff and went off script, she said some very interesting things, including saying things like the concept of human shields is used by terrorist organizations and all kinds of weird and wonderful things. And I think that, you know, what the ANC is trying to do, although noble, it really is not speaking, is not walking the walk that it's speaking, essentially. Because what we have seen happen in Nkandla, people wearing ANC T-shirts, people calling for basically parallel structures, and now they are condemning all those things, but they're not giving a clear picture of what kind of sanctions are they working on. Why did they send somebody from the NEC to be in the middle of that chaos? Because they knew it was going to be chaotic. And what it is that they plan to do as the governing party of South Africa, and how they plan to quell all of these destabilization. And they're not telling us what their plan is for the planned political instability, which was declared on South Africa in Nkandla over the past couple of days.
Ralph Mateja, your takeaways?
Thanks for your good evening. It's the mixed messages we get from the ANC. In the first place, they speak generally about their support of state institutions. They speak generally that members of the ANC, they've said in their statement that they should subject themselves to the commission, they should cooperate. But they do have a specific issue which relates to one former President Jacob Zuma, which is a very specific matter that requires that they speak more specifically in actually condemning the behavior that he has orchestrated so far. I mean, it is a fact that the people in Nkandla have been there because President Jacob Zuma did not dissuade them from coming there. They've come to support him. It is part of his strategy. And you hear now Jessie Duarte mentioning at the end that they love President Jacob Zuma. They are happy that they wish him all the best. They wish that his appeal could succeed. Nowhere do you hear them saying that we respect, or maybe coming more forthright, saying that we want to uphold the rule of law here. This is where the problem is. It is the mixed messages. It's almost like the party has got a different position where they support President Jacob Zuma, but they find themselves in a difficulty because they are now in charge of state institutions that are supposed to meet consequences against President Jacob Zuma. That is the ANC that is not clear here for you.
Ongama Mdimka?
Good evening, Prof. Vuyo, once again. So I think what we must understand here, in agreeing with the rest of the colleagues, is that the ANC, yes, indeed, the power has shifted in the sense that there's a singular voice up until that point of doublespeak against the activities that happened. Previously, when power was very much contested in the ANC, you would not hear an outcome from the NEC meeting which is as close to being direct as this one. However, partly because constituencies are important in ANC and people must win over constituencies, you will hear messages like this because they are not informed by rationality, but more by a need to continue to appeal to a constituency that is seen to be important in terms of party politics. So that's the reason for the doublespeak.
I'm going to start with you this time around, Ralph Mateja, because I want us to start with Jacob Zuma on the back of that Constitutional Court judgment that was read out by Judge Khampepe, and then work our way backwards to the events of the past 5-6 days, including the weekend drama outside his home in Nkandla. Would you, Ralph Mateka, have expected the ANC to come out unequivocally and condemn the former president, given just how scathing that judgment was?
I mean, that judgment did not give any leeway for the ANC to take a softer position. I mean, here the ANC has to be custodian of the state institution. They have to be seen coming out in support of the functioning of the judiciary. So what they've done, they've sent ministers there when their NEC meeting failed to meet or called off. They sent the ministers there, Vuyo. Ministers who were not even clear in what capacity are they there. They're there as ANC members, but they're using state resources and the bodyguard to go and do all these things. And at the same time, they're supposed to be custodian of state institutions. They go there, they have maybe what they call an amicable conversation, talking to people who gathered there in Nkandla. Just that act, Vuyo, one would say is almost a continuation of the contemptuous behavior that had been orchestrated by President Jacob Zuma. So the ANC here, they are not covering themselves in glory. They took time to take a position. And again, they are not coming forthright and saying, we defend the rule of law, we defend the functioning of the judiciary, we believe that the court order has to be implemented. All they are doing, it seems they are finding a dignified reason to be complicit in evading the execution of this court order. That is not clear. Of course, I agree with my colleague there, Ongama, that the politics of the ANC does not allow them to come forthright. But the circumstances here, Vuyo, no longer allow this double talk. That is why they are in an untenable position.
Asanda, when Jesse Duarte was asked during that briefing about the NEC people who were supposedly deployed to Nkandla to speak to the ANC's former president, she mentioned the name of Lindiwe Sisulu, who was accompanied apparently by ANC, NEC and NWC member Tony Yengeni, who incidentally was the same person who turned around and stood right next to former President Jacob Zuma during that mini rally that was held there. And when she was asked what had happened, she said, Jesse Duarte that is, she said she didn't get a report from those members who went there. Incidentally, this was at a meeting where the issue of Jacob Zuma and what happened outside his homestead was the only item on the agenda. What do you make of that?
Very clear, and it's been clear to everybody that the ANC is literally having a very weird kind of internal war that has now spilled over into the public and is threatening South Africa and the rule of law and our, checks and balances, and the separation between the state and political party is becoming more and more blurred, because we know that the ANC really struggles with the separation. And why am I saying that? Because as Ralph has said earlier, you have to be very clear when you deploy somebody who's both in government and in the NEC or ANC, why you are deploying them, in what capacity you are deploying them. And in fact, I would even venture to say that personally, I would think that if the ANC was an ethical organization, which we know in a lot of ways it isn't, that they should never have sent, even earlier, Bheki Cele should never have gone to Nkandla, knowing that this guy has so many court cases that are ahead of him, which may require Bheki Cele in his capacity as the Minister of Police to act. He should have never been sent. So that he was sent and that we were not told, or there was no clarity on exactly what it was that he was doing there, was the first problem. The second problem is that you've got a Tony Yengeni who went on social media with a gun, talking about how he is ready to defend Jacob Zuma and basically using what one can call colloquially war talk. And so what is the NEC doing if on the one hand it is telling that the person that it deployed officially is the same person that was seen on social media, posted on social media with a gun. What are they telling us about their own integrity? What are they telling us about their own cohesion within the political party? And how are we to believe that the ANC, that they want to project this image of unity and this image of clarity, and yet, as we read and as we see, it's very clear that there is no cohesion, that there is no unity, and that there's really just a bunch of headless chickens running around in ANC t-shirts, both in Gandla and in the ANC, as far as I'm concerned. And my biggest worry is that we have a political party that has 1.4 million members. I'm going to say that number again. 1.4 million members in a country of 55 million plus South Africans. And this political party is now holding the entire South Africa hostage. This very same political party was voted into power by a minority of a majority. What do I mean by that? Only a fifth of South Africans, that is 10 million people, only 10 million people of the possible 38.7 million people who can vote in South Africa voted for the ANC. So more people voted for opposition parties and more people did not vote than those who actually voted for the ANC. And so my question is, why are we as South Africans being held hostage by the representatives of a fifth of this country? And if you look at the card carrying 1.5 million, and you look at the 2,500 maximum people who were in Gandla, those numbers tell you that the majority of South Africans are not at war. It is a minority of a political party that actually has delusions about its numbers and has delusions about how big they actually are. And I think that Jacob Zuma is actually the best kind of wake-up call that South Africa needs to see that we have been wasting our time as a country with the ANC, and that it's time we all use our votes to actually vote people who are interested in leading this country for the interests of the majority of this country, rather than the politics of when we were in exile and we were fighting against apartheid.
I'm going to pick up on a couple of issues that you raised there. But for now, I want to go to Ongama and ask whether we should read anything or much into the position that was also taken, or decision that was taken at that ANC-NEC meeting, which is to call ANC Secretary General Ace Magashule to account for some of the utterances that he made there.
Sure. So let me answer by continuing some of the ideas that Sanda is raising. So, Bravuyo, and I'm using a systems approach in terms of thinking about the conduct of the ANC. One of the things that we look at in terms of organizations as systems is whether they show due sensitivity to the external environment, or they get so inwardly focused in claiming their autonomy that they, in fact, end up not being responsive to the external environment to the extent that very soon or later they become extinct. Now, the ANC has been trapped in a process where it is caught between a transition to become an open, what we would call an open system, that type of an organization that responds to the external demands, and being a closed system, that type of an organization that claims its autonomy, even at times when that autonomy may serve to self-destruct. So I've said that to say, when you see instances where actions are being taken against comrades, it's part of the stretch position that the party finds itself in, where it feels that there must be seen to be action being taken precisely because of the need to respond to that wider society demand, which Asanda so painted so nicely, that wider society is actually bigger than the voting, the card-carrying membership of the ANC. So it's attempting to do that when it's being it takes this action. It's not preferred in ANC politics to take actions which as close as possible to an election conference, political actors may serve to be neutralizing themselves. So they're acting against ACE precisely because they realize that it's not only internal dynamics that matter, but also the party has got to be responsive to the demands for accountability, even beyond itself.
Ralph Mateja, when Cyril Ramaphosa, in fact, civil society, of course, including here, the ANC's own stalwarts and former activists were responsible for dismantling Jacob Zuma's power or hold on the ANC, and to a very large extent for Cyril Ramaphosa's rise, which continues. Now, has he, or does he seem to have forgotten that was responsible for putting him where he is, in a position where the ANC is now able to say we are self-correcting? And I'm asking this because a lot of people that I've spoken to over the past few days have taken issue with the fact that the president is nowhere to be seen, and as the head of state didn't find it necessary to oppose, former President Jacob Zuma's court application, for example.
Well, we are politically, President Ramaphosa here, I think, is aware that he's managing a very divided party, where deliberate effort, I think, are being made to ensure that some of these key decisions relating to renewal are not being seen as his own personal or individual adventures, because that has been the source of criticism within the party, whereby some are saying that this is not about renewal, it's about purging people to make sure that their political fortunes decline. Some are no longer eligible to stand for leadership and so forth. But the ANC members agreed to this resolution that has come into context, resulting in people having to be vacate their position, having to step aside and so forth. They have agreed. I think at issue here, it is the consequences of this. And I would say that in this regard, no one within the ANC can say they are fully in charge of this one. I think even President Ramaphosa, as much as this can be seen partially as his agenda, as a ticket that he also came to the party about, saying that he's going to get the party, to help the party self-correct, and at the same time making the message to South Africans that he will try to realign the party. The reality is the consequences of that and the displacement it is causing within the ANC, the consequences that I think are going to spill over into the contest for leadership. And one way or another, something has to give. I mean, I believe that the differences between the factions within the ANC have reached a point where you can no longer reconcile them. There is no longer a point of compromise here. Like where we are now, it's very simple. You are either renewing, and when you are renewing, there are consequences with members that are going to have to face the might of the law, and also the party taking the high road when it comes to supporting the functioning of the judicial institution, including prosecution, such as also including dealing with those who are belligerent, such as the case that we are dealing with in relation to Mr. Zuma. You are going to live with those consequences for you. But as you are managing it, clearly, I think President Ramaphosa is being careful here not to be seeing too much of the scene. I mean, these institutions are functioning. This is the work of the court. As the head of the executive, stay for saying that you support the functioning of the court. You don't need to worry and get your hands too dirty politically on this thing. It looks like the system is just moving on its own. You cannot stand on the rooftop and celebrate as President Ramaphosa, no doubt about it. But at the same time, you can't give those speeches where you are actually almost coming out as nudging the judicial institution in a particular direction. Remember, whether or not you had someone like President Ramaphosa who support this thing, in a normal society, there ought to be consequences. In a normal society that calls itself a democratic society based on the principle of legality, you have to have this kind of consequences and this kind of investigations happening, irrespective of whether or not they have a champion. They ought to happen in a normal functional society. So President Ramaphosa can just sit back and say, wait a minute, the system is just going back to how it ought to be. No, there are no heroes here. Or maybe you can celebrate the outcomes that might help you in your political, I'll say, maneuvers as the president. Maybe when you get to the next elective conference, you will have a fewer people to worry about. But those are political consequences that flow out of the functioning of judicial processes that ought to happen in any case for you.
Ongama, you were nodding there when Ralph was saying, you know, it would seem that, you know, the factions have reached a point of no return. Are they that far apart? Does it mean that each to his own and then hell must break loose if need be? Is that where these factions are?
I think Ralph is putting it kindly and nicely. I often say the momentum of self-destruction has reached a point of no return. Yeah. The factions are bigger than the party, and they've been since the period leading up to Nasrec. And the speech that actually defined the terrain for me was in the aftermath of Nasrec, Ace Magashule saying, it's only going to be 5 years, comrades, and we're going to regain control of the party. Now, in terms of post-war language, we talk about the need to demobilize after there's been a war. So if you use the analogy of a party that was at war with itself leading up to Nasrec, you then needed a post-conflict demobilization of those forces that had been in conflict. Now, that is part of the, at a level of the country, that's part of what makes a peace process to be sustainable. That the factions did not demobilize was always latent conflict within the party. All that it needed was to be triggered by actions that consolidate this trajectory of renewal, and then you would see a full-out conflict. Part of the requirement for the camp that supports former President Jacob Zuma is the subjecting of judicial, political, and other institutions to the political imperatives of the ANC, not even the political imperatives of the country. So that is why, for example, you see every time that former President Jacob Zuma gets cornered as far as accountability opportunities, he strikes a counter strategy that redefines what the issue is, so that we continue to have, it's almost like a guerrilla warfare, where I know that if I play the game in this platform, I'm going to lose it because I'm going to be exposed that one, for example, on the issue of state capture. So what's best to do? Redefine the issue to be about whether or not President Zuma should be jailed, and not the issue of the core issue of whether or not he was involved in state capture. So we are all engaged in a discussion about the rightfulness or wrongfulness of the State Capture Commission exploring the option of going directly to the Constitutional Court, precisely because that was part of the Zuma strategy of how not to answer questions at the level of the Commission of Inquiry. I know I've broadened the issue, but the point I'm making is that part of the game is trade-offs and political accommodations on the one side, and as my colleague Ralph was saying, on the other, consolidating this path of renewal so that the ANC is seen to be responsive to what society is demanding of it, which is crucial, by the way, if it continues to want to grow that 10 million that Asanda was talking about, rather than see it shrink.
If you've just joined us, the ANC today made public its decisions that it took yesterday at a special meeting where it discussed the situation around its former president, Jacob Zuma. ANC Deputy Secretary General Jesse Duarte coming out of that meeting saying the ANC leadership does love its former president and would want his court application to succeed. At that same media briefing, Duarte telling us that they have taken a decision around their Secretary General, Ace Magashule, who must account for some of the utterances that he made outside the former president's Ngandla home. The ANC, NEC condemning some of the things that we saw there. This conversation continues right after this. Welcome back. This is the Watchdog. Asanda, I'm going to come to you first this time around. It cannot be that, the rest of us are entirely or almost entirely at the mercy of people you say only constitute a minority and do not have or appear not to have our interests at heart. What would it take in a situation like today, with the ANC-NEC having to reflect, on the events of the previous 5 days? What would it have taken to you? What is the first thing? What would have captured your imagination? That which would have said or suggested to you that things have indeed, the ground inside or within the ANC-NEC has moved in towards a more recognizable direction?
I think that the first thing for me is what we actually needed was less doublespeak and a more clear and concise message. And I think that Jessie Duarte herself should have been very careful and made sure to only stick to the points that are in whatever she had been given that had been prepared for her. Because I think the statement itself it read beautifully and it hit all the right spots and it said all the right things. And it's only when she was speaking off the cuff that it became very clear that the ANC was engaging in its usual doublespeak.
Can I ask you to stop right there? Can I ask you to stop? I just want to canvass this same point with your fellow panelists. Ralph, do you agree that the statement in itself, began to say to whoever was listening, things or the ground seems to have shifted here? Did you get the same impression?
I did, and when it's not a crime for NC members to profess their love for President Jacob Zuma and how much they admire him. But the context here is telling. This is at the time that he's in defiance of the order of the highest court. Does the context allow for that? And for Jessie Duarte to say that it is a recognition, actually, that if there is anyone who has doubt about the impact of the crowd in Nkandla having gathered around that, see it for yourself. I mean, you and I, we are talking now, and there is no doubt in my mind that the political machination out of court is actually bearing fruits. President Jacob Zuma is not reporting to jail, and in some of his court submission today, he's even pointing out to that actually jailing him, it is almost becoming impossible because the possibility of instability, which some would argue that he actually orchestrated in the first place. So the NC is under pressure here. I agree with Asanda there that the ground is shifting a little bit. I mean, look, in a moment such as this, the NC Deputy Secretary General can profess their love for President Jacob Zuma as a comrade. It tells you that can be said. That's why she said it.
Did you get the same sense? Did you get the same sense that just from the part where she started reading that statement up until the amen of that statement, up to that point, it felt like the ANC had changed from what we had experienced before?
Absolutely, except that it's vintage ANC to attempt to appease while you are, advancing a particular direction against a person. Because remember, and part of this is the deeply flawed way in which political power is constituted in the party, where, unlike, for example, in places like, I suppose, even in the US system, where people campaign openly and campaign in lower structures at subnational levels, all the way up, alliances are still important. But here in South Africa, alliances have a much more greater role in terms of the constitution of a particular power block as power base, unlike in the US, for example, where you find that over and above the alliances, candidates are still open to campaign and canvass their support in the broader membership. Now, precisely because Jessie Duarte, among others, know that Jacob Zuma is more than just the person. He represents a power base himself. You will find that a person, in a statement like this wants to still appeal to the constituency of the person and the power base of the person over and above, which ends up being contradicting and all the things that the colleagues were saying.
Asana, let me then take you back. I hope I didn't mess with your train of thought. I just wanted to canvas just that particular point. Now, say she had indeed not said anything afterwards, including the professing of love and, the hope for a successful court application. From what was said in the statement, which no doubt would have been a product of a group of people who sat in a room and said, we want to say this as the ANC coming out of that meeting. What for you? What are the sort of things that stood out that would have said to South Africans, okay, we're seeing a different, or we're beginning at least to see a different ANC from what we've experienced up until now?
I think for me, one of the most poignant points that we made in the statement is that the democracy that we have and the system of governance that we have was not a mistake, and it was a very deliberate system that was chosen. Because the ways in which Jacob Zuma and his supporters have been sort of moving and declaring, they have been speaking as if the ANC had no power, the ANC had no influence, and the ANC was just given a constitutional democracy without their participation or their rubber stamping of it. And I think that it's always a very good thing to keep at the back of our minds that they chose this particular system for a very particular reason, and they were very much involved in the development of the Constitution. And I think, it's always important for me to remind all of us as South Africans that the reason why we have one of the best constitutional, one of the best constitutions, at least on paper, is precisely because we built the Constitution on the basis of coming out of prejudice, of coming out of abuse of power. And so the Constitution, in a weird kind of way, was almost built for this very moment that we are in, because we are coming from a system where the political party that was in power used and abused the law for their own means. And so what Jacob Zuma is doing now is something that, in an interesting way, one can almost argue was actually forethought by the creators of the Constitution, because a lot of what has gone into our constitutional democracy and how it's built is really about making sure that there are checks and balances. And I want to move away from the ANC a little bit and go back to a question you asked around Ramaphosa. I think that Ramaphosa has failed us as South Africans and as our president. I'll tell you why. Jacob Zuma accused the legislature of being illegitimate. He went further to argue that the judiciary itself in this country was illegitimate. Now, as the man who is at the helm of the state in this particular moment, we deserved at the very least a curt statement that declared support for and reaffirmed us that this government believes in the legitimacy of Parliament, believes in the legitimacy of the judiciary, and that is why they continue to stand as the executive arm. He didn't do that. He failed. The Chief Justice also failed, because the Chief Justice, once again, should have come in with a statement to remind us that the reason why we have three arms of power is to make sure that there are checks and balances. And I think also we are failing ourselves as South Africans consistently, because we allow ourselves to be lied to by somebody with a very long history of lying. What am I talking about? Jacob Zuma speaks as if he is not a member of the elite. He is very much a member of the elite. He is not a victim. He is very much a member of the elite. In fact, he has been a member of the elite since the dawn of democracy in 1994. He has been an NEC member since 1994. We are basically talking about somebody who has never experienced life in the democratic state of South Africa as an ordinary citizen. Because even now he sits with the position of former state president. He sits with bodyguards outside of his house that this government, this state that he is accusing of being illegitimate, is paying for. And one of the questions that I have at this point in time is, when are we going to recall our benefits? Because you cannot be a person who is claiming that the state is legitimate, that the judiciary is illegitimate, and by inference, the executive is illegitimate, and still be drawing funds from the tax base of that very same country and state. And I think that, Jacob Zuma has gotten away with making very dangerous and sweeping statements without any consequences. And the idea that we have a former president, remember why we pay, by the way, former presidents. We pay them because we don't want an outsider coming in and taking the information that this person knows from when he was in power as a president and using it against us. What is Jacob Zuma doing now? That is exactly what Jacob Zuma is doing. He is taking the information that he has and he had when he was a president, and he is using it to fire up political instability. To me, that is treason, and to me, that is part of what the ANC needs to start addressing. And so while I was happy with the statement and its foundational basis, I'm hoping, and I know that this is, it's a dream. It's never going to happen. The ANC doesn't have that kind of, truth-telling. What would be great in an ideal world is if we started to talk about what is it that Jacob Zuma has done? Is it treason? And what are the implications for the benefits that he still draws from the state if he alleges that the state is illegitimate? Because remember, if he as a former president believes that we are in an illegitimate state, what more? Why should I as an ordinary South African believe in the legitimacy of the state? Because if we go back to political science philosophy, governments don't govern because, ANC, we don't have an ANC government because ANC people were anointed at birth and they have a birthright to rule. They are in power because we as South Africans, through the vote, give them the power. And this happens to something called the social contract. And the social contract is in place until those who are the signatories, that is, ordinary South Africans who voted, and the government continue to keep their end of the bargain. As far as I'm concerned, we have a political party that is a governing party that is failing to hold up its end of that social contract. And that is very concerning for me because essentially they are or have declared themselves as unfit to govern. Because if they were fit to govern, the Minister of Police would not be declaring that he is not going to implement an instruction of a very important arm of, the judiciary. And these are the things that we need to start talking about. And these are the conversations I wish we were having instead of rehashing conversations around Jacob Zuma, who, as far as I'm concerned, is really he's a dying animal politically. That's why he had to rile up 5,000 people out of 1.5 million members. Because if he really was that powerful, we should have seen higher numbers there. And the numbers should not have been demarcated along linguistic and cultural lines, because the main thrust of the message and the narrative there was that this is a Zulu fight, this is a Zulu war. So my question is the ANC now a Zulu party?
Well, let me read something here, and I'm going to ask Ralph Mateja to chip in here. In the statement, the ANC says it has further noted, among others, the following political developments and narratives over the last 6 days, and the implications for social cohesion and stability in the country. Now, among the things that it raises, or included in that list, is 1, failed attempts at national mobilization, at organizing shutdowns, lawlessness, and mass protests against the Constitutional Court ruling. And then 1 I want to add here, populist attempts by some to use retrogressive and opportunistic ethnic mobilization for their own opportunistic objectives. Even though, Ralph Mateja, the ANC doesn't say who exactly or call out the people who are actually responsible for this. Does it satisfy you, the fact that it is just in very broad and general strokes put that issue out there, in addition to, of course, the issues that Asanda was raising just now?
I think it's quite good that the ANC recognized the elephant in the room. They use that code Vuyo, ethnic chauvinism, quote unquote, as an element that they're saying South Africa need to be careful about. And Vuyo, again, this is the characterization of what is happening in Ngandla. We need to take a step back and also understand that Ngandla is not a reflection of South Africa. What is happening in Ngandla, we should never forget, Vuyo, that we don't have a constitutional crisis in this country. You just have some members of the ANC divided. The problem is within the ANC. As far as South Africans are concerned, there is no crisis, there is no issue here. And I would imagine that even the ANC having to acknowledge that there seems to be an element of that ethnic mobilization there. You also don't want to approach it in a way that you are almost legitimizing it. You are actually warning that this is not a way to go. And for me, I would say that it's never enough, but I also don't want to be in a situation where you just quickly throw it to say it's all the Zulus meeting while we don't have a proof to that. It's almost like legitimizing that thing. You can throw the statement with caution as well, saying that that kind of mobilization is actually it's not ideal. I think one of the difficulties that you find here, Vuyo, at the end, it's a party that is struggling itself, and struggles is almost becoming a national issue. What we are dealing with in relation to Mr. Zuma, it's not a constitutional crisis. It's not a constitutional issue. It's actually a criminal procedure misdemeanor in terms of law, contempt of the court. We are not yet at the substance of the matter. But this misdemeanor is now being dealt with as a constitutional issue. It is preoccupying that arm of the judicial resource to a point where I've had even the premier of the KwaZulu-Natal appearing in that evening in Ngandla saying that this issue has divided the nation. And I wanted to say, what nation is divided? I mean, you've got a few people in Ngandla who are divided, or maybe even outside Ngandla that are divided. And also, again, it's not just everyone in Ngandla. Poor Ngandla is now going to be labeled in that way. But I would imagine that you can find people in Ngandla. Some are not even interested in this view. So it's not a national crisis here. It is the division within the ANC and the party has not been able to manage this. This division are threatening to be constitutional crisis, but I don't think in their origin they are of constitutional nature whatsoever. These are misdemeanor behavior of someone who actually will need to obey the court order in this regard.
Well, in the statement, the NEC states clearly that, and I quote, the current situation in KwaZulu-Natal does not represent a popular uprising, as Ralph has just said, but, and I continue, has been engineered from within the ranks of the ANC. Does that acknowledgement kill debate, or it just makes things worse? Because you would then have thought that if there is that kind of acknowledgement that this is engineered from within, then the culprits are called out and dealt with, like immediately without any hesitation, because the ANC has made up its mind about the origins of this thing. It is not doubting. It is not saying it's going to investigate whether this may have come from people within. It says it is people who are within the ANC.
So while I agree with the characterization of what happened over the weekend as something which has divisions within the ANC, that statement by the NEC is usually enough in a society to mobilize people to get to a civil war. So countries go into civil war not necessarily because there's a permissive environment for it to thrive, but because there arises groups of people that exploit grievances in order to actually have that push towards a civil war. So that mobilization sometimes is enough in itself to actually push things towards instability, which is why my response to what you asked, I think Asanda and Ralph earlier on, would have been, I expected nothing less than the firing summarily of, the expulsion of all those that are involved, including, for example, former President Jacob Zuma and from the ANC membership, as a testimony of the fact that truly the ground is shifting. Otherwise, other than that, it's still this slow, progressive a consolidation of a power base of affection without necessarily doing those things which are expected, which are good for the country, but may in the short term weaken the organization. I suppose part of what the ANC would be worried about would be to manage the political risks of the state itself, that if you acted harshly against those people that were mobilizing nationally, what you would serve to do would not only be to divide the party, but to divide even the legislative houses in which the ANC is in control. Because once you push the action against those within the party to such an extent that the other faction begin to see that there's no longer any prospect of pursuing their political objectives within the party, it is good for those that want to rebuild quicker, but it may create interim instability in the sense that those that want to wreak havoc and bring some form of retribution, they may then use parliament and provincial legislatures as a terrain of struggle until the election time when they can leave and go and contest on their own. So part of the hesitation has got to do with managing the political risks of the party itself in government, but also the hope that in maintaining this approach that is slightly soft, you could win over some of the opponents to your side of the factions. Okay,
you in your summing up did answer what was going to be my last question to all of you. We have less than 2 minutes left, and I'm going to ask each of you, Asanda and Ralph, to answer this question. So, what did we get from today? More of the same? The ground has shifted? Or one step forward, a few steps back? Ralph?
I think we've gone one step forward and a few steps back, because the statement itself had all the makings of a good statement and all the makings of a clear path, but then everything in between reminded us that we're sort of back to where we started. For me, what's really been interesting is watching the responses of opposition parties, and I think this is yet another opportunity that our opposition parties have failed or are missing out on. There has never been a better time to stand up for those South Africans who feel bullied by the ANC, and they haven't done the job of that fight.
Ralph?
I think what we are seeing within the ANC is what we would not have expected within the party months ago. I've been observing for quite a while. For the ANC to issue a statement such as this is quite interesting. It shows some realignment. Is it enough? Is it directly in proportion to the crisis that they are facing? It's never enough for the ANC. The party is always circumspect. We know that. And it's disappointing at that point. But certainly in the greater scheme of things, it is the strongest statement you get.
Ralph Mateka, Asanda Ngwasheng, Ongama Mtimka, thanks to all three of you for coming through this evening. And that is where we're going to leave it. The Watchdog, tomorrow, same time, 8 p.m. here on the SABC channel 404. Till we meet again, have a great night.